Hey everyone, welcome back to another Fall Obsession podcast. My name's Sam, hosting you guys once again, and we are on a whitetail roll here recently. Not just talking with our own team members, podcasting with them, hearing their stories from this season in the field, but here recently we've been having some what I would refer to as whitetail experts when it comes to whitetail biology, whitetail habitat management, hunting strategies and tactics, all that kind of stuff. These guys are some experts in that field. We had Grant Woods on the show last week, and this week we have Don Higgins on the show to talk everything whitetail. I also have our own guys, Ryan Reading and Mike Teepee, in this podcast with myself and Don. And this is a really, really good podcast, once again, for anybody that is wanting to learn more about whitetails. And it is the best part about it is not a repeat by any means of our podcast with Dr. Grant Woods. So fresh material, talking whitetails, talking hunting, all that kind of stuff. It may seem a little bit kind of like we're almost hitting Mr. Higgins with some rapid fire questions throughout this episode, just talking about whitetails, just hitting them with one thing after another. But man, when you got a guy like Don on your show, you got to make the best use of your time, and you got to get as many questions out as possible, and we certainly did that in this episode. So hope you whitetail fanatics out there, you guys that are wanting to learn more about deer hunting and how to hunt deer on your property, hope you guys enjoy this podcast. Before we get into it, as always, got to give a shout out to the partners for the show. Hoot Camo is a podcast partner. Been rocking some Hoot gear for a couple seasons now. It works in many, many different environments, even though they are a Texas-based company. I've worn them in the hardwoods of Texas. I've worn them in the flatland, eastern plains of Colorado, the mountains in central Idaho. The patterns are versatile. They work in all these environments. The gear is high quality and it holds up to the elements. And the best part about it is if you are looking for a good quality set of camouflage, you're not going to find a better price than Hoot Camo. And we have a code for you, Fall Obsession 15. Punch that in at checkout and it will save you guys some money on your next order from Hoot. They also have fishing gear, lifestyle gear, the hats, the shirts, all the kind of stuff. Go check them out, hootcamo.com. Bear River Archery is the official bow shop of Fall Obsession here in the North Texas area. Justin does a great job out there in Van Alstyne, Texas, setting people up right in the archery world. So if you are local to the North Texas area and you need some archery needs taken care of, then go see Justin at Bear River Archery in Van Alstyne, Texas, and make sure that you tell him that Fall Obsession sent you. Trophy Edits is a Fall Obsession partner. If you guys have had that photo from a memorable moment in the field, you've been looking forward to seeing that picture, and when you actually laid eyes on it, just didn't do the moment justice. Maybe it was blurry, out of focus, lighting was off, whatever it might be. The Trophy Edits team cleans those pictures up for you, makes the most out of your hunting memories. Go to the link in this podcast description. It'll take you over to their website. You can see everything they do over there, and by clicking that link, you'll let them know that you came from Fall Obsession. We always appreciate that. Go check out Trophy Edits. Ridge Rock Hunt Company is a podcast partner. Derek Eves is the man over there in Mississippi, setting folks up with vetted and trusted outfitters across the country. So if you have been saving up some money, you're ready to book with an outfitter, perhaps that once-in-a-lifetime hunt, then give Derek a call. He'll work with you on all the details and find something that's right for you. Ridge Rock Hunt Company. Go check them out. The Outdoor Call Radio app is a podcast partner. Outdoors Dan from Respect the Game TV. He created an app that you can download on any device where you can stream hunting shows and podcasts on a loop every single day. You will catch Fall Obsession podcast playing on that loop on Mondays, the same day as our new publications, as well as tons of other hunting shows and podcasts we all know and love. Go download the Outdoor Call Radio app today. It is free, and you can start streaming immediately. And make sure that you follow Outdoors Dan and the Outdoor Call Radio on social media, because they share some live radio show broadcasts that they do every week on those social media pages. You don't want to miss them. Go download the Outdoor Call Radio app today. Finally, thank you guys again for tuning in to another Fall Obsession podcast. Wherever you are listening to this episode, whatever app, whatever platform, be sure that you hit that follow or subscribe button, whatever they have up there for you. Turn on the notifications if that's an option. Leave a review if that's an option. If you like the show, we always appreciate that. But we don't want you guys to miss any upcoming Fall Obsession podcast episodes. Be sure that you head on over to the YouTube channel. We have a lot of projects that we are wrapping up right now that are about to hit our YouTube channel. channel. This includes some films, some shows, some podcasts, all sorts of different things that we produce over here at Fall Obsession, and they are all coming to our YouTube channel and Carbon TV. And if you're not streaming our shows on Carbon TV, you need to be. Carbon TV is a free hunting and outdoor streaming app. Think of it like Netflix for hunting, if you will. And you will find 4 different Fall Obsession shows on Carbon. This podcast is on there, as well as our staff-inspired video podcast series called Couch Chats, as well as our 2 different hunting shows, Texas Dirt and Midwest Mindset. You can find all of those on Carbon TV. Make sure you're following Fall Obsession on all the major social media platforms. We post daily on those, and all of our content filters through fallobsession.com. That's the website. That's the hub. Go check it out. With that, we are going to talk some more whitetail and dive deep with Mr. Don Higgins. You guys are listening to another Fall Obsession podcast.
Oh, you got her, dude. She's down. Let's go.
Dude, I just shot a deer of a lifetime.
Freaking smoked him.
One with nature, and if you're a believer, one with God.
Definitely gets your heart pumping. Boy, you are in trouble.
Fall Obsession Podcast.
Welcome back, everybody, to another Fall Obsession podcast. My name is Sam, hosting you guys. We are here with a few different gentlemen recording with me tonight. We have a couple guys from our own team, Ryan Reading, Mike Teepee. They've been on the show before, and our special guest this week is Mr. Don Higgins. Welcome to Fall Obsession Podcast, sir.
Thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
We're honored to have you, sir. And I know many people probably know who you are, especially if they're tuning into this podcast and everything. But for the one out there that might not, tell us how you got into managing big whitetails.
Wow, that's a long story. That might take our whole hour just to tell my story. But no, I shot my first deer back in 1979. I was 16 years old. And when I walked up on that deer, I knew what I was put on this earth for. And I've really always been a trophy hunter. Just kind of went through a number of stages to get to where I'm at today. But back about a little over 30 years ago, when my grandparents passed away, I had an opportunity to buy their small farm. And at the time, there was no deer on it. It was extremely rare to even see a deer track. That didn't even happen once a year that you'd see a deer track. That's how rare the deer were. But I started working on the habitat with the hopes that maybe one day being able to hunt deer on the farm. And well, it's far exceeded my expectations. And 30 years into it now, I think it's probably the best whitetail property I've ever been on, acre for acre. A lot of lessons learned the hard way, made a lot of mistakes along the way. I just tried not to repeat the mistakes and get better all the time. And that's where I'm at today.
That's awesome. Well, I know your time's valuable. We want to make the most of it and everything. And I'm going to break the ice and dive right in with a question that I would think you probably get asked all the time. And if folks look you up and look through your website, look through everything that you do, you say there, right there on the front page, that you can fall for the gimmicks and hype, or you can learn from somebody who's actually been successful. So what does it take to be successful and kill big deer year to year like you do?
Well, learn from your mistakes, but at the same time, I had mentors back when I was younger. Guys like Gene and Barry Wenzel, Roger Rothar, Alan Foster, and Alan Foster in particular, probably shaved 10 years off the learning curve for me. I was 18 years old, just out of high school, started a new job and Alan was a coworker there, 10 years older than me, and he was doing what I dreamed of doing. He was shooting big deer on a consistent basis. And I just started picking his brain, and literally from the season before I met Al to the first season after, the number of bucks I seen from a tree stand tripled from one season to the next. and I owe a lot of that to him. And I don't consider myself an expert. I consider myself a student of the whitetail, and just continue to try to learn and get better each season. So my goal every season is that I want to end that season as a more knowledgeable and better deer hunter than when I started. My goals today have nothing to do with the size of the bucks I'm going to shoot. It's just trying to get better and learn more about deer and habitat. And when you're more knowledgeable, you can apply that and be more successful.
Absolutely. So what are some of the things that you do to promote that educational environment for yourself or for other people that you might be consulting, just in the form of tools or strategies that they're using on their properties, whatever it might be? What are you doing to learn these deer better?
Well, I do a lot of consulting, and on average, I'm going to be looking at about 60 to 80 properties every winter for clients. And it's the conversations with these clients and with people at trade shows and things like that that typically spark something. They may not have the lesson in that conversation, but something they say sparks something in my mind and causes me to look at a certain topic from a different angle than I'd previously looked at it. And so really it's the interaction with other serious deer hunters like you guys that helps me to continue to learn, because on this podcast tonight, I'm just about pretty sure that one of you is going to say something that gets me to thinking, and it might be a day or two from now, it'll all come together, and something that you say sparks a new idea or a new angle of looking at something.
Yes, sir. Well, so I'll start off and go into one thing that I've been kind of playing around with and picking other people's brains on everything, and we'll get into that sort of stuff, and that is moon phase. I know it's kind of random, but I want to bring it up. It's one of the questions that I have for you. I grew up. I hunt Texas. I'm from Texas, first off, but I grew up just with an old school mentality of, you have a full moon, the deer move at night, you're not going to see deer during the day, end of story. And recently, and large part thanks to the guys that are here with us on this call, on this podcast, they've over time kind of helped me debunk that theory in my own mind and be open to some other interpretations of that or some other concepts. So I want to ask you, in your opinion, does the moon affect whitetail hunting, and if it does, how so?
Well, I do think there is some effect from the moon, but I always say that weather trumps everything. So you can have the ideal moon condition, whatever that might be, and weather is going to play a much bigger impact on deer movement than the moon does. It was probably in the late 80s, early 90s when Jeff Murray came out with the moon guide that Adam Hayes has today. I bought the moon guide from Jeff Murray, way back when, and I started paying attention to it. And it wasn't even a month into the season, I saw that little chart, that little moon chart, was dictating my hunting more than common sense. I threw that thing away, and I never paid attention to a moon chart again. I think we can allow things like that to influence our actions more than it influences the deer's actions. So, the moon guide tells you, hey, it's a great day to go hunting. So you do whatever you can to go hunting, even though the temperature is 20 degrees above normal and the wind's blowing 50 miles an hour. On the other hand, that moon chart might tell you that today's a terrible day to go hunting, but a cold front just came through and temperatures are 15 degrees below normal and it's the middle of the rut or whatever. And we let that moon chart, guide, whatever, dictate us more than it dictates the deer. So I quit paying attention to it way back. The first year the moon guide ever came out. I tried it less than 30 days and threw it in the trash and haven't looked back.
Well, that's definitely definitely interesting to me. I've been trying to, like I said, debunk the own theory in my mind and everything. I'm gonna let these other guys talk a little bit too. I know Ryan had some questions about the rut, and Mike had some stuff for you as well. So I don't want to hog the show. I want to give these guys a chance to pick your brain as well. But
Awesome.
Yeah,
I'm
so
also
I mean, I had a quick question. So during the season or as the season progresses, how do you or do you at all, uh, how do you hunt or handle scrapes or anything like that in your area?
To be honest, I don't pay attention to them, to scrapes at all. I love to see them. I love to put trail cameras on them. But as far as my hunting locations, anyway, my stand sites are picked based on terrain and wind. And terrain dictates where I want to hang my stands, and wind direction tells me when I want to be there to hunt them. So I love seeing scrapes. You know, the more buck sign that you see, the better. I mean, it's just proof positive that you have bucks active in the area, but they don't dictate my stand sites whatsoever, or my hunting approach.
So you said terrain. Now, what type of terrain features do you look for where you're going to put your stands that are going to help you harvest, the animals that you're looking to harvest?
Anything that funnels down that deer movement. So, you might have a wide travel corridor, and a creek makes a sharp bend, or a river makes a sharp bend, for example. Well, that bend is always going to concentrate deer movement in farm country, the inside corner of a field. Where the field, let's say a field has woods on three sides of it. Well, you're going to have two inside corners in the back of that field, where there's woods on two sides. Inside corners are terrain features that are always going to funnel deer movement. And it's things like this more than anything else that dictates where I put my stands.
Yeah, that's a good point there. Um, I didn't really want to jump into the rut, but I guess I can do that. I was going to ask you what your favorite time of the year is, besides being in a stand all the time, to actually hunt or harvest your deer. Is there certain times you focus on more than the others?
Well, I hunt the entire season. Actually, the rut is my least favorite anymore. I'm to the point where I'm hunting individual bucks, very specific animals, one animal. And during the rut, it's a crapshoot where that deer might be. The buck that I'm trying to kill, he may be 2 miles from where I'm sitting. I've killed in recent years. Most of the bucks I've shot have been in October. If you know where those deer are bedding in October and get close to them, that's a great opportunity to kill those deer. Late season I like as well, but to be honest, in recent years, I've had my target buck shot before the late season, actually before the rut. As I sit here and look at the deer on my wall, the most recent ones, I think the latest that any of these deer in, say, the last 10 years or so have been shot was I got one here that was shot on November 5th. Every other one in the last 10 years was shot before that. I think a big part of that is a lot of those came off of my farm, although not all of them. I take that back. I do have a buck I call the Joey buck that was shot at the end of November. That was not on my farm. A very specific situation there, where I needed some hunting pressure to push that buck into just a little pocket of cover that I trail cameras had told me in previous years when the pressure's on, that's where that buck would go. And so I shot him 2 days after gun season closed, by waiting for the right wind and then getting in there before daylight and shot that one. But typically October is my favorite time. I mean, the weather's nice. I'm only hunting afternoons in October, so I'm out there on beautiful fall afternoons. The woods are just full of color. The deer have not been pressured much yet. The crops are coming out. I can look out across the countryside from my tree stands, and I can see farmers at work harvesting crops, and just an awesome time to be sitting in a tree stand. The weather's nice, and yet I've got a great chance to kill a big mature buck if I'm close to where he's bedding.
For sure. That leads me into something that I wanted to ask you. So, I'm up from Western New York, so I have two parcels up here. They're both about 140 acres. Do you notice, or have you noticed, like on your parcel, I call it, nobody really talks about it, but I call it like microclimates. Like, so how do I explain this? So on each side, like here's my ag field. Let's say the ag field is 40 acres. On three different sides there's timber, right? But they're connected, but there's long routes and short routes to get through. Are you noticing that? Well, what I notice is that certain bucks will have like microclimates, I call them. They're like, I guess you could call them home ranges, but it's really not. Um, they'll stay on one side of my farm, and then another one will stay on the other side of my farm, and then you have a couple over there, and then they like swap. It's almost like they move. Um, I don't really know how to explain it, but I'm wondering if you're noticing anything like that because I'm trying to understand that myself.
Absolutely. So, on my farm, obviously, I've got a number of trail cameras up, and there'll be certain trail cameras where I will never get a certain buck. And I'm talking a mature buck, and yet there'll be other cameras on the farm where I get him all the time. And then I'll have other bucks that, yeah, the camera that I didn't get buck number one, he's always there. And then I think that, even just traversing across the property, I think different bucks have different ways of going from point A to point B. That's where the terrain features really come in because it really limits their options to get from point A to point B so that all that traffic is going to come through a fairly narrow travel corridor. But I've absolutely seen that bucks on my farm will prefer different parts of the farm and rarely go to another part where another mature buck does just the opposite.
Right. Yeah, it's just something I wanted. I try to ask people that all the time. Some people they see it, some they don't. But I think when you have good management practices, that's kind of what some of these deer do. Another thing I wanted to ask you is, what's some of the important things that you can tell people or teach your clients about what they do or what they can do to make their property better? Is there something that you fully implement? I mean, it's not a one size fits all, but are there some consistent things that you try to do to help people manage their properties?
Absolutely. So number one, anytime I go to a property, my number one goal or the first thing I'm looking for is we got to figure out how to get the bucks bedding on that property. If your target buck is bedded on the neighbor's property right next door, your odds of killing that deer are 10% what they are if that buck is bedded on your property. We got to get the bucks that we want to kill bedded on the properties that we own, the ones I'm consulting on. So typically, it always involves creating a sanctuary. The sanctuary the term sanctuary even is going to vary from property to property. I was on a property yesterday, for example, where there was some fantastic wooded cover, thick wooded cover, didn't need any attention whatsoever. Like sometimes we'll have to go in and do a timber harvest. There's a lot of mature trees, open up the canopy, get the sunlight in, get some treetops on the ground, maybe do an aggressive timber stand improvement or TSI cut, whatever. But this property already had great wooded cover for bedding cover, but we needed more diversity. And so we're going to do some major switchgrass plantings on that farm. What I've noticed is on my farm that some individual bucks will prefer to bed in switchgrass and another individual buck will prefer to bed in the wooded cover. And 95% of the time, that buck, whichever he prefers, that's where he's going to be bedded. If he prefers switchgrass, well, guess what? 95% of the time, he's going to be bedded in the switchgrass. The reason you want diversity is if you get a buck that comes along that likes switchgrass and you don't have any, well, guess what? He might bed elsewhere. If you're the only guy in the neighborhood with switchgrass and one of those bucks comes along, well, you're going to own that buck because he doesn't have any other option. So the number one thing I am always doing on any property I consult on is I got to figure out what we got to do to get those bucks bedded on that property. And then once we do that, we got to keep them there as many daylight hours as possible to keep them alive and move them on to older age classes. And the next thing that comes along is when that buck stands up in the afternoon, he's probably going to be heading either to a food source or to look for does. And if he's going to look for does, the first thing he's going to check out is the local food sources because that's where he expects to find the does. So I want to make sure that we've also got big, diverse food sources on the property to hold that deer during daylight hours. So he stands up out of that thick, secure bedding cover sanctuary, and the first place he's going is to a food source on our property. I don't want him to head to the neighbors because the neighbors got better food or more food than we do. He's probably going to go to the neighbors, but I want him to do that after dark. When the sun's up, I want to keep him on my property or my client's property as long as possible. So that's the two huge things. And then we want to lay those things out in such a way that we can kill that buck, create huntable travel patterns as that buck moves back and forth between food and cover. In other words, I see it all the time, on the internet, and these guys that are consultants are posting pictures of their property plans, and they've got food plots and bedding cover just randomly scattered like a checkerboard across the property, and that makes it very difficult to hunt and kill a buck, and especially when you're targeting one specific animal. So we're doing those two things, but we're laying it out in such a way to maximize our ability to kill that buck once we get him there.
Yeah, that makes sense. That way it's not sporadic.
Yep.
I know you mentioned food, so I wanted to pick your brain on that. Do you feel that bucks favor a certain type of food? Is it all year long, late season? What are they? Have you seen them, go to specific foods, or what do you implement? What types of foods, for the big bucks, particularly, not just does?
Well, it's all about diversity. You're not gonna go to the 7 meat all you can eat buffet and just fill up on ham or just turkey or whatever. You're gonna fill your plate with a little bit of everything. And a buck is the same way. He's not gonna just show up because you got apples or persimmons or whatever on your farm and just do nothing but eat apples all night long. He's going to eat some apples, and he's going to move over and eat some clover. And if you got soybeans and corn, he's probably going to eat some of that. Diversity is huge. The other thing is, each one of those food sources has a little bit different nutrient makeup. You can even take like a brassica blend that's got turnips and radish and rape and kale and all these different things. Each one of those plants has a little bit different nutrient makeup. So one may be high in a certain vitamin or mineral or whatever, totally different than the other. Well, a deer has the ability to balance his diet given the opportunity, and that's where diversity comes in. So let's just say his diet is lacking in vitamin A, and there's a certain plant on your farm that's high in vitamin A. He craves that plant. And I don't know if you guys ever been by a livestock farm, maybe horses or cattle, and in their pasture, the animals have eaten all the bark off of a tree, off the trees in that pasture. And that's because they have a nutrient deficiency of some sort, and they're craving that. They're eating that bark to try to get it. And in such a situation, you can put mineral out for those cows or those horses, and they will instantly stop eating the bark off of those trees. Diversity of food sources is absolutely huge. And when it comes to hunting, what I've noticed over the years is that when the temperature is a little bit above normal for that time of year, it doesn't matter what time of year it is, it could be the 1st of October or January. If the temperature is above normal for that time of year, the deer really crave green food sources, your cereal grains, oats, wheat, things like that, your clovers, even brassicas to some degree, although they typically need a good hard freeze on them to bring the nitrate levels down in those leaves for the deer so they're not so bitter, so they're more palatable. But then if the temperature is below normal for that time of year, the deer seem to hit the grains a lot harder, soybeans and corn in particular. You could probably also throw grain sorghum in that mix as well. But when it comes to for me hunting, I'm looking at the temperature as much as anything. And if the temperature is warm for that time of year, I'm going to the grain sources. If it's really cold for that time of year, I'm going to hunt closer to the grain sources.
That's some good information. Thanks.
Yep.
I do have one question, kind of piggybacking off of some of the stuff that Ryan's already talked about and everything. And this is a scenario that was playing out for me earlier in the year on my property, and Ryan is all too familiar with it. But I wanted to ask you, because you were talking about how a lot of most of the bucks, or if not all the bucks that you're killing, are mainly before the rut. They're in October. So this past year, my number one hit list buck, pattern to a T, but 100% nocturnal. And into October, all the way into November, this deer, from what I could see in the eyes that I had in the woods, he would not break his nocturnal pattern. All the other mature bucks on the property, they started daylighting. This deer would not daylight, or at least I never could catch him daylighting until we were in the rut. What You have any insight to that, or how a hunter who's trying to figure out what this buck's doing, how he can change his perspective, his tactics, anything like that to try and hunt this buck that's exclusively nocturnal?
I'm not sure. I believe there is such thing as a nocturnal buck. There may be a buck that's nocturnal most of the time, but there's going to be days that he's on his feet in daylight. Um, I know I got a buck here on the wall I'm thinking about in particular that he just hardly moved in daylight. But we got into the late season, we got some brutal cold weather, and I seen that buck on his feet 3 afternoons in a row, well before dark. Ended up killing him on the third day. But the buck I just shot this past year, Zacchaeus, I called him. I don't know if you guys have seen the video that I put out on Zacchaeus, but he was a buck that wasn't moving much in daylight at all. And I happened to get a picture of him going into bed one morning. It was still dark, but I mean, it was right about daybreak. And so I knew he was close to where that picture came from. I knew he was close to where he was going to bed for the day. And I had a stand not too far away that I could hunt with that particular wind, and went in and with a set of rattling antlers and just lightly rattled, even though it was October 7th, a month from the rut. I wanted that deer to think that there was a couple of bucks that were already on their feet sparring. It was safe for him to get up and head that direction because these bucks had already checked things out. And that's exactly what happened. He circled around downwind. I was off to the side where he couldn't catch my scent. I came right in and I shot him, right at the end of shooting light. So, I mean, that's one tactic, but you got to know where they're bedding. I mean, early in the season, it's all about the bed. Everybody gets wrapped up on food. You get on the internet, they talk about the early season food sources and on and on. And even on a property that's not heavily pressured, you're way better off to get back closer to the beds. And that becomes even way more important if you're hunting pressured deer on public land or something. Then you absolutely have to be on the beds. And every buck's got a little bit different personality. Some of them, are going to move more in daylight than others. But I'm not sure there is such a thing as a totally nocturnal buck.
So on that note, because I have learned a lot just this season, and if anything, it's made me realize how bad of a hunter I've been up until recent years and everything. But um, on that note, the whole concept of pressuring deer, right? Because I was functioning this year pretty exclusively because I had multiple bucks in different parts of the property I was watching and willing to hunt depending on what they did on camera, but I didn't want to go in there and quote unquote blow them out if I went in there too early. I know that a trail camera only gives you a one perspective, right? One window, and that deer can skirt and have different methods of transportation around those cameras where you're not seeing them move. So in this sense, like a buck that on camera looks nocturnal, with your logic and everything, he's got to get up in the daytime sometime. How much are you yourself going into the woods to try and put eyes on that deer, and what's the line you walk between quote unquote blowing them out of there?
Well, I don't put any pressure on. And so these bucks that I'm shooting today, I can't remember. I'm looking here at my walls. I can't remember the last, I haven't, in 20 years, I've not shot a buck. At least 20 years, I've not shot a buck that I did not know about and did not know about before the year I shot him. So I'm putting the pieces of the puzzle together, not the year I'm hunting the buck, but previous years. I'm doing that primarily with trail cameras, but also with, direct sightings. So when it comes time to kill that deer, I'm way ahead of the game. And I think that's the situation that most deer hunters find themselves in, is they're always a step behind the buck. So they get a picture of a buck and he's in daylight and they're thinking, oh, my buck's in daylight, now I can go hunting. Well, they should have been hunting before that. It's just a matter of putting together that annual pattern ahead of time, and trail cameras are the way to do it. I put them in places where I let them soak for the entire season and don't go back. I gather the intel, in March when I pull that camera. I'll use a 32 gig card and a fresh set of lithium batteries, and I can get 40,000 pictures on a set of batteries, so I can leave that camera there for the full season. I know it's frustrating. You go back and a limb has fallen in front of the camera or something, which happens from time to time, but I think the human intrusion, I don't think most hunters understand how little human intrusion it takes to bump a mature deer. And so these bucks I'm shooting, I'm not hanging stands even right before season. My stands are hung in the winter right after season if I need to hang new ones. The shooting lanes are cleared then. I'll use a chainsaw if I have to clear the right shooting lane. And then I don't go back to that stand until the day I hunt it 6-8 months or whatever later. But the intel is coming from previous seasons, not the season that I'm planning to kill that deer.
Gotcha. That's good information for sure. Sounds like I got a sequel to this year with this buck.
Well, I can tell you one thing: if he's still alive,
He is.
wherever he was at this year at a certain time, he's almost sure to be there next year at that time. So let's say you have intel on where he was at the first week of October or the first week of November, or whenever it was. Next year, he's almost certain to be at that same location at that time of the year. You need to get in there in this off season and get your stands and everything ready. Know your access routes to each stand and the wind direction you need to hunt each stand, and just stay the heck out until it's time to go in and kill him.
Yeah, makes sense. I do want to ask you too about you mentioned the scenario with your buck and the little bit of a rattle that you gave with hitting the horns together earlier in October than most would expect. What are your thoughts on rattling, grunt calling, just trying to call whitetails in? And the reason I'm asking is because and it could just be me doing it wrong, but I feel like I've had very little luck with hitting the horns together. I have the last several seasons just kind of stuck to, I wait until I have eyes on a deer before I hit him with a grunt call or a snort wheeze, and I've had very good success with that. But again, I already have eyes on him at that point. As far as blind calling, what are your thoughts on that? And obviously the putting them together that early in the year.
Well, when I rattled October 7th and got that buck to come in, that's probably the first time I took rattling antlers to the woods in 7 or 8 years. I just had intel on where that buck was likely bedded, and I knew he was likely within earshot of the stand that I was going to be in. And I knew he was, at that time of the year, I didn't have, I don't even know if I had any daylight pictures of him yet. I knew I needed to do something to get him to move past that stand, and calling was basically the only way to do it. Grunt call is not an option really at that time of the year. But I just felt that, well, to kind of set the stage a little bit further, right in front of the particular stand where I shot that buck was three giant bur oak trees that produce acorns, you know, huge crop of acorns almost every year. And the deer will feed under those acorns within the cover a lot. And I was close enough to those that I was trying to convince that deer that there was already a couple bucks under those trees feeding on acorns, and that's what the whole rattling thing was about. And he came right into those oak trees, and he circled around, and he got the wind before he was coming into those oak trees with the wind right in his nose, but I was just off to the side enough where he couldn't quite catch my scent. So I don't blind call whatsoever. I think blind calling, for every buck that you call in, you're going to educate 10 that you don't even see. And you're just saying, hey, here's my stand right over here. Don't come over here. Um, there's somebody over here, danger over here. I think it's a overused tactic. I think calling has its place, but very, very rarely. I mean, in the course of an average season, I probably call one time.
It's good to know. I think one of these other guys had a question. I might have cut you off a second ago.
I was just going to ask him, have you noticed any increased luck rattling or anything like that when you're just sitting downwind of doe beds if you do that? Because every time, not every time, but I've noticed a lot of my luck between the ag and, you know, so I'll lay it out for you. On the 40-acre cornfield, I'm probably 100 yards back in the timber, but then just past me, maybe another 100 yards or 150 yards will be the doe bedding. And if I'm set up between the two and the bucks happen to be bedding in the corn, when I hit them antlers together and I'm closer to that doe bed, they usually get on their feet and head toward that doe bed, um, almost like clockwork. It's kind of like I've had more success doing it that way. I was just wanting to know if you've ever experienced anything like that um, in your hunting.
No, I really haven't because I just don't call that much. It don't rattle that much. Like I said, carrying those antlers to the woods this year on that one day was probably the only time in the last 7 or 8 years that I've even had rattling horns with me. I do carry a grunt call, but it's usually buried in the bottom of my pack. And when it's time for me to use it, it takes me so long to find it that the buck I'm wanting to grunt to is already gone. And I just, a mature buck is already a very alert and wary creature. And when you call to him, that just becomes heightened all the more. He becomes even more sensitive. I mean, he's already looking for danger all the time anyway. But when you call, then he's really looking. And you get away with that's why they circle downwind. He's already using the wind, but then when you call, he's going to make darn sure he's got the wind when he's coming in. When you use a scent, he's already super wary, and then he smells that doe and heat scent. He smelled that before. If he's a mature buck, he knows every trick in the book. And there's sloppy hunters out there throwing scent around, and he's already smelled it. He probably knows the brand better than we do from smelling it. So I think you're way better off and to be honest, I am probably the most conservative deer hunter you're ever going to talk to. I put probably the least amount of pressure on a property, especially my own property, probably any deer manager out there. When it comes to hunting, I take a very conservative approach. I'd rather have my stand back on the edge and not spook a buck than to be too aggressive and spook him off the property. And my theory is that as long as that bucket continues to bed on my property, sooner or later, I'm going to get a shot at him. But if I go in and I get too aggressive and I bump him off and boom, he goes and beds on the neighbors, I've just ruined my chances for the whole year. So I would much rather play it super conservative, keep the buck on my property, and know that sooner or later he's going to screw up and I'm going to get my chance.
So
Yeah, that's good because I was actually going to ask you, my next question is how close are you getting to the bedding? And you kind of answered that. So
as close as I can get without him knowing I'm there.
So
Good stuff.
on that note too, you're talking about being that conservative and everything, and if you're hunting it right, if you're hunting it in the sense that you're speaking of, eventually you're going to kill that deer. What do you have for hunters, like guys that work your normal Monday through Friday 8 to 5 jobs and have limited time off every year and limited time in the stand? What's your advice to them if they're trying to apply that, and how much time are you putting in the stand yourself?
Well, today, to be honest, I hunt less today than I ever have in my life.
Okay.
And, but I'm doing more work in the off season than I've ever done in my life. I used to have a regular factory job. And what I was doing was, I would hunt 40, 50 different stands in the course of a season. I'd burn them out basically. So I was making up for my lack of quality hunting property and my lack of knowledge and everything else by the number of stands and properties that I can hunt. And it was a whole lot easier back then, just to be brutally honest. I used to be able to knock on 10 doors for permission and get permission on 8 of them. Today, I knock on 10 and don't get permission from any. And I could knock on 25 doors and be lucky to get permission for one. So it's a whole different game when I was young compared to today. You're way better off to not hunt bad conditions than to go out there and just hunt when conditions are wrong and educate the deer. And I think that's one of the hardest things I have to get across to some of my clients, because most of my clients have been very successful at something in life. I mean, I got a lot of professional athletes, business owners, doctors, attorneys, whatever. And these guys have worked very hard to get to where they're at, to where they can afford a hunting property and afford to hire a consultant to come in. And in their life, the harder they worked, the more successful they were. An athlete, for example, the harder he trains and, the more he concentrates on his nutrition and things, the more successful he becomes, the better he becomes at what he's doing. Well, with deer hunting, there's a fine line. You can do things to slowly, increase your level of success. But once you reach a certain point, boom, it falls off. You've done too much, and your success actually falls below where you started. And that's a hard lesson to get across to a guy who's busted his butt to get where he's at in life. And here he starts, he's getting later in life. He's got more free time. He's got money to invest. He wants to become a deer hunter. He wants to shave years off the learning curve. But to shave years off the learning curve, we need to pull back the range, and you can't hit it as hard as you did other things in life to be successful. It's a very tough lesson to get across. And a lot of times guys have to learn it the hard way. You'd be shocked at how many clients I go and do a consulting visit and put together a plan that I absolutely know without a doubt this will work to make this property fantastic. If this guy will just follow this plan, he's going to be successful. And I leave, and I usually hear from most of my clients at least once. They'll have questions after they see the plan, but then I don't hear from the guy for 3 or 4 years. And then boom, out of the blue, he contacts me and says, hey, Don, you remember me? You did my farm years ago, blah, blah, blah. I didn't follow your plan. I didn't believe in it. I tried a different way. I seen something on the internet, on YouTube or whatever, and I tried that approach, and it just didn't work. So I want to go back and I want to start over with your plan. Can you come back again? And I can't tell you how many guys have paid me to come back a second time to look at the property I already looked at once to get them on the right track. And it's always the same thing. It's always they were super aggressive, and it's counterproductive. We got to keep them mature bucks bedded on your farm. And you can't be on your farm every day putting in water holes, filling water holes, running mock scrapes, having trail cameras all over the place, micro plots here, there, and everywhere. All that human activity does, it's counterproductive. You would be better off just to stay off your property and never do anything than to be running in there every weekend doing some kind of project. And that's a very, very tough lesson to get across to a lot of clients.
Oh, make
Yeah,
make sense.
I want to say one thing too, like what you're saying there. I cringe every time I get on social media, get a text thread with some hunting buddies. I absolutely cringe when I hear the words "can't kill them on the couch,"
Yep.
because I think more deer are saved because you don't just stay on the couch and hunt the right weather, hunt the right wind, hunt the right time of year, hunt the right location. Instead, everybody thinks, "Oh, I got to be out there, got to be out there." And here in the Midwest, here in southern Michigan, northern Indiana, it'll be 85 degrees out in October. Guys don't have anything on camera, they haven't seen anything, and they're burning up their best rut spots. And it's just like, guys, like you said, you're being so counterproductive. Stay at home, spend some time with the family, spend time with the wife, the kids, earn them brownie points, because when the time's right, you need to cash them in.
Absolutely. Very well said. I'm telling you, every time I see it on social media, somebody says you can't kill them from the couch. I instantly know that guy's success is not near the level it could be.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have any idea what he's got on the wall. He may have a wall full of giants, but I'm telling you, he could have twice as many giants as he currently does. That's a statement that just tells me the guy is very inexperienced and he's got a lot to learn. And I've got a lot to learn too. Don't take it the wrong way.
Yeah.
But that's one thing I have learned is that you can overpressure a property really, really easily.
I'll say when I was younger, I was blessed. I had more ground to hunt. I was single, no wife, no kids, hunted every single day I could. And I was able to spread it out a little bit throughout the properties so I could still be able to use the wind to my advantage. But I'll tell you what, sometimes the only reason I ever killed any deer was just because of the sheer numbers of hunts. Here recently, the more I've been more involved in the habitat side of things, especially the last 15 years, I get more thrill out of watching the wildlife use the habitat features that you manipulate, whether it's through plantings, cuttings, tree harvests, etc. That I get such joy out of that. And then what I've been able to do ever since I've had a wife and kids is I've had to step back and realize I can't sit in the tree as much as I want and as much as I used to, even on some of the days that are good days to hunt. And so I've been able to learn my deer herd better, like what you've done. And I've seen my success in October's go up because of it, because I've put so much less pressure on these deer. Like my number one target buck going into this year was a 5-year-old that I've watched for 4 years in the state of Indiana. Never amounted to much antler wise, and I'd been waiting to see if he'd ever make that jump. He never did. But I had all those years of experience. I knew where he was bedded. I knew what to expect. Went in there October 3rd, first hunt, didn't see him. In the evening, October 4th, I kill him. Second hunt in there on him in the evening, early season. Last year, same scenario, October 8th, got one down, another deer that I had some history with. But yeah, I mean, it's just, man, I cringe when I hear that, guys saying that, can't kill them on the couch. And I got buddies that still say it to this day. I tell them all the time, no, you can't kill them on the couch. You're right, but you can do a lot more harm by getting off that couch.
Absolutely.
Now, I want to bring something up while I got you done. Earlier this year, you and Terry had a podcast talking about cell cameras. And I'm not going to say you're wrong, because I've had my doubts on cell cameras. I've had my doubts on cameras in general when it comes to deer, knowing they're there, potentially spooking deer. I know over the years I've strived, when applicable, to set trail cameras 6, 7, 8 feet up so they're not eye level with the buck or doe, whatever the deer is. Because I know earlier on I used to set a lot of cameras, waist high, maybe chest high to us, which is then perfect eye level for a deer. And I noticed earlier this year you talked about cell cameras. You felt like in some form or fashion, cell cameras had maybe a little bit more negative impact on deer, especially mature deer, opposed to a non-cell camera. Now, with that being said, I know that your target buck that you harvested earlier this year, you had a cell camera picture of that deer morning that you harvested him, which obviously led to the MRI, which then set up the pulling the antlers out, setting where you did, everything coming together. Now that you've had this season to really reflect on cell cameras, what's your thoughts? Do you still feel that way?
Well, I don't have an explanation whatsoever. All I can go by is my experience. And it's before I threw the idea out, I had a lot of different people bring it up to me, ask me if I thought there was something to it. I always blew it off. I don't know about that. I don't know how the deer knows that there could be a cell camera there. So I don't have an explanation. I do think there's something to it because I can take a non-cell camera out and be very, very efficient at getting pictures of most, if not all, the mature bucks on a property. With a cell camera, it's a different story. I don't get near the number of photos with a cell camera that I do with a non-cell. Maybe it's just the way the cell camera works. Maybe it takes a picture and it's sending the picture, and while it's sending the picture, it's no longer capable of taking another picture. I don't know what the explanation is, but absolutely 100% without a doubt, I can take a cell cam or a non-cell at the same location, and the non-cell is going to get significantly more pictures than the cell camera. I think deer can detect either camera. I've seen multiple examples from a stand of bucks walking behind a camera instead of in front of it. Had one situation years ago where I had here on my farm, I had a fence opening. There was an old cattle fence around this bedding area, and I just cut the fence down between two posts and pulled it open, led right from the bedding cover of that cow pasture into a food plot. I had a big oak tree right where happened to be where I cut the fence, and that's where my stand was at. And I watched one day where this string of does, single file, comes and walks right past that gap in the fence where I had a camera as well. And behind them comes a buck, just a 3.5-year-old buck. And he's coming right down. And instead of going through that gap in the fence where the camera was, he goes around behind me and jumps the fence, and then he rejoins the does. He ended up at the same place. He was following the does, but he would not follow. And I don't know if it was the fence gap or what it was. He was still in very close range of the tree I was in. So I don't think it was me or the stand that spooked him, but I think it was the trail camera covering that fence gap that spooked that buck. And there's been numerous other examples where I've seen bucks. They don't vacate the area. They don't just totally avoid the camera, but they maybe skirt that camera by just a few yards where you no longer get their picture. And it seems to be way more prevalent with cell cameras and non-cell. And I have no explanation. I'm not going to say they're picking up radio waves or anything like that. I don't know. I'm just sharing my experience.
No, because that's why I wanted to bring it up, because not only did you talk about that earlier this year, but I've had that same experiences. I have some ground that I hunt that's an hour plus away from the house. So obviously you try and get cell cameras out there to help out with not driving down there all the time. I've witnessed some scenarios where I've gotten pictures of a really nice deer target buck on a food plot for, say, maybe a scrape on the edge of a food plot. And I'll get them once or twice. I'll catch them looking at the camera. And then all of a sudden I get very few pictures of them from that point on. Or in the summertime, I had a non-cell camera in that exact location, getting a whole bunch of pictures of this deer. And then I switch it over to a cell camera, maybe 1st of September or something like that. I don't want to do the drive anymore. Season opening October 1st. And I'll notice that first day or two, I'll have that cell camera up. Boom, boom, there he is, just like he was the previous X amount of days. Now all of a sudden, I'm very rarely getting any more pictures. But then I'll go down there and hunt it just because the weather's right. And then I'll see that deer. But instead of him doing what he was doing before, he's just out on the edges. And I'm thinking to myself, was he here that whole time? But I didn't hunt him because the cell camera didn't show he was there. And that's kind of where I'm at now. I'm almost wondering, are the cell cameras doing more harm for me personally when it comes to I'm overthinking it, not getting the pictures that I thought I should be getting or was getting. But then there's so many instances I go out and hunt and then I see the deer, whether it's the target deer or not, moving freely amongst the property, but yet they're just not right there where the cell camera's at. So I'm almost to the point now where I'm wondering, is it better to either remove cell cameras altogether, and go with traditional cameras, or maybe just like you've experienced before, I've witnessed deer go around traditional cameras. It almost makes me wonder if, I know in a recent podcast you made a comment about, is technology going to get to the point where it makes it easier for the deer to know they're being hunted, which then makes it so that they live longer, basically. I'm wondering if we're not already teetering on that right there.
Well, I say for every every mature buck that was killed because of a camera, there's 3 others that survive because of the camera. And typically it's because the person running that camera can't stay away. He's got to run in and check it once a week, and he educates the deer. But something interesting is I've got about 50 or so trail cameras, but I've only got 12 cell cams. And there's one of those cameras here on my farm, one of those cell cameras here on my farm, that it gets more pictures than the other 11 cell cameras combined, day after day after day. And that camera has been there since July. I'm still getting pictures to this day, from that camera, but never once has a deer looked at that camera. And it's at another fence crossing. It's a spot where I've tore down the old cattle fence for a gap of about 15 yards. It's a wider opening so the deer feel more comfortable going through it. And that the camera is off to the side, right at the fence gap, covering that gap. So when the deer walking up to that opening, the camera is not in their face, it's off to the side. And I think what it is those deer, when they come up to that opening, they're either stepping into the open field or they're coming from the open field into the brush. I think what happens a lot of times is those deer walk up to that fence gap. I'm getting their picture, but that deer is so focused on what's out in that field. That's where he's going to be. That's where he's going to expose himself. And he's so concentrated on looking for danger out in that field that he's not even paying attention to the camera that's just off here to the side. And I've not had one deer look into that camera in since last July. We're looking at about 6 months now. And it's been like that for several years. That camera just gets the pictures, and it's a situation that I'm going to try to replicate more with my cell cameras. Find situations where those deer are concentrated on something, out in front of them while that camera's off to the side getting their picture. That's one, and that's exactly that camera I'm talking about is the one where I got Zacchaeus's picture that morning before I shot him that evening. It's a real interesting topic, and I don't have the answer for it.
It's definitely something to be tuned into in years to come, I feel like, for sure.
Yep.
Yeah, the other thing I wanted to hit on, Don, if we have time, is EHD. And just so here in the Midwest, obviously you're not far from me in Illinois. Southern Michigan, Northern Indiana this year, we got hammered. Last time we got hit this hard was 2012. Some areas they're saying 30%. Some areas are saying 60 to 80% kill off, especially here in Southern Michigan. I know from the ground that I own and hunt that some of the pockets that I hunt on, I haven't sat the entire year. I've ran trail cameras on them since July. I got one piece in particular where there's 3 deer alive on it that I'm aware of, according to the cameras, and multiple confirmed dead within miles, within a mile or two. So I guess when I bring up the whole EHD thing, there's a couple things that get questioned a lot on social media. And then people will even say something to me about it. and it's been, I've taken note of it, and a lot of people like to say that it seems like the bucks get hit harder from EHD than does. Maybe there's some truth behind that. Maybe it's just that we're fascinated with bucks. What I will say is, from my point of view, I feel like if that is true, let's say it is, that would you think that it would be right to think maybe there's a theory out there that the time of year, at least, that most of this EHD occurs, which is usually what, August, maybe September, sometimes maybe late July. Bucks are bachelored up, so you've got groups of 2, 5, 10, depending on the area, together. They're feeding together, they're bedding together, they're probably going to water sources together, and then maybe they go to the same water source, they get infected, then they go to the same bedding area, they die, someone stumbles up across 4 bucks within 100 yards. Does that make sense, opposed to so many does not dying because that time of year they got their doe family group, they have their fawns, they're kind of seclude themselves, they're not herded up with a whole bunch of other does?
Well, I've heard a number of theories. I think, for one thing, there's a whole lot more does than there are mature bucks. So, if you lost 75% of your does, there would still be several does around. You lose 75% of your mature bucks, and there ain't much left. Another theory I've heard, not sure how accurate it is, but it kind of makes sense, is so the midge gnat that spreads the EHD virus, it doesn't just like bite the deer on the skin. It goes into their nostril. And a mature buck has a bigger nostril, obviously, than like a fawn, especially. And I've heard that is why the mature bucks get hit so much harder. I don't know. Not sure that we'll ever know. But it certainly seems like the mature bucks get hit really hard when EHD hits. And luckily, we got hit really hard in 2012, when most of the Midwest did. This year, it was way more spotty, and I don't think I lost a single deer on my farm to EHD. I'm also kind of an oasis out in a sea of ag, and I think that helps me. I think all the chemicals and such that are sprayed on these ag fields kind of helps me. I think it keeps the insects under control a little better. But, who knows? It's all theories at this point.
Yeah. No, I just wanted to know if you had, thought maybe that there's any correlation. Obviously, like you said, at the end of the day, it's all theories.
Mm-hmm. No, I wish we could come up with an answer, though, because I'll tell you what, there's nothing more heartbreaking than, watching a buck grow up for 3 or 4 or 5 years and then put on a giant rack, and then before you even get to hunt him, boom, he's laying in a creek dead or a pond or whatever, or just totally disappears, and you have no idea what happens to him. And the thing of it is, once a major die-off like that happens, it's years to recover. It's not like the next year you're back to, to shooting big bucks. I remember in 12, it was 4 or 5 years before we recovered from that.
Yeah, that's what I'm afraid is going to be the case in this area, because some nice mature bucks still hit the ground this year because they made it through. But the age structure below it, man, I'm not seeing 2, 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds. It's almost like just a year and a half olds are the only ones that made it.
Yep.
Well, I definitely want to be respectful of your time, Mr. Higgins, and everything, but I want to give these gentlemen, do you guys have any other questions or anything to shoot his way before we start wrapping up? I know it seems like a lot of rapid fire here for the last hour, but we enjoy having your brain to pick on the show.
Well, I enjoy doing it. Believe it or not, I've had 3 invites for podcasts besides my own this week. So,
oh wow,
I try to do them all. I enjoy talking deer. Like I said, I'm sure there was something that was said tonight from one of you guys that I'm going to think about, and it's going to make me look at some topic different than I have in the past. And, who knows where that might lead.
Absolutely.
Oh yeah, I'm ready to get up there to his farm and get me a 190 also. I'm ready.
We don't have 190s here. We're just 110s maybe on a good day.
That's because all the 190s got shot this year.
Yeah, right.
Well, hopefully there'll be another one next year.
Oh, I'm sure there will. Yeah, I know with how much work you put into the habitat, passing young deer, and even passing 4 and 5-year-olds, that I'm sure you got a crop of bucks that are, coming up. Like you said, as long as something unforeseen doesn't happen, like EHD or car accidents.
Yeah, you never know if they're going to be there until the day they walk in front of your stand. There's a lot that can happen, but I've got a good crop of young bucks coming on, so who knows? I'm hoping one day there's another 200, but
yeah,
you never know till it happens.
Since we were given one last question here, Don, I'm gonna fold with this. As a father of 3 young ones, and obviously you have children of your own and now grandchildren of your own that are getting into the hunting. What's that like for you, and more specifically from the grandson? I know you, I think Walker maybe been out on the farm this year, and then his own place there in Indiana. What's that? Can you just describe that? I mean, because I'm sure that watching him kill that deer on your place this year probably, dare I say, made you more excited than killing your buck.
Well, the interesting thing is, I've got 3 grandsons, but Walker's the one that probably his interests mirror mine more than the other 2. And it's really interesting how much more opportunity he has than I had at that age, how much more knowledgeable the general average everyday hunter is than they were back in the day. I mean, when I was his age, all we had was like Outdoor Life and Field and Stream magazines, and the articles in there were almost like fairy tales instead of real life examples. And the amount of information is so much greater, but his opportunities are so much greater as well. I mean, we didn't even have deer around here when I was his age. I mean, none. I mean, when I graduated high school, I could count the number of deer I'd seen in my life on one hand. That's how few a deer we had. He can see that on one hunt on this farm easy, probably 5 times that on one hunt. So it's just a different world today, but it's really neat to see like one of your kids or grandkids have the same passion that you had, and know that you can help him be even more successful than you've been, because by the time he's my age, he's gonna the opportunities he's gonna have are just so much more than what I ever had, and I'm happy for that, and for any other kid as well. That I like helping young people, not only through hunting, but just, life advice. One thing I learned early on was, if you're in a conversation with someone younger than you, you do a lot of talking, but when you're in a conversation with someone older than you, you need to do a lot more listening, because they've already been where you're at, and they can give you some good advice if you listen to them.
That's a fact.
Absolutely. Ryan, you have any closing questions or anything?
I did have one, because Don, I know you reiterate a lot about bedding, and you said that you try to keep the bucks bedded on their farms. I'm just wondering what you implement to do that.
Well, number one is freedom of human intrusion. That has to be part of the equation. You can have the very best bedding cover on the planet, and you can ruin it in a heartbeat with just a little bit of human intrusion. It doesn't take much, just a little bit. So it's got to start with complete freedom of human intrusion. But if you've got quality cover that's free of human intrusion, and diverse cover, heavy TSI cuts in a woodland where there's a lot of sunlight getting in, and you got a high stem count from all this natural regeneration, and then you've got to establish switchgrass planting that deer can easily hide in, where to the point where you can be 10 yards from that deer and never see him. That's how thick the cover is. When you combine quality thick cover with complete freedom of human intrusion, that's you're going to have the bucks.
Appreciate that.
Yep.
Well, I got one question in closing as well. We'll just go around the table here. But
Okay.
you've talked a little bit just about mainly in passing, just about mature deer. Mentioned some ages of deer. Mike talked earlier about watching a deer for 4 years and eventually harvesting him, never seeing him make the jump in antler size. What constitutes a mature buck to you? Age, antlers, what's that jump look like?
Well, it's got to be age, and I think a 5.5-year-old buck is a mature deer. I think they'll have most of the time, most bucks are going to have their best antlers after that, 6.5, 7.5. But it varies from individual. I mean, we all know the kid that was 6 foot and 200 pounds in the 8th grade, and then you go to your 20-year class reunion and he's still 6 foot 200 pounds, and a lot of the other kids that were little passed him up. But it's the same way with bucks. They mature at different rates, and some can have their best rack at 3.5 even. A lot of them will have really, really good racks at 4.5, and you don't gain a whole lot by letting them go after 4.5. Maybe a little bit of mass, but in total inches, you don't gain a whole lot. But in my opinion, a 5.5-year-old buck is a mature buck. And if I had my way, I would I'd let all the bucks that I'm watching get to 6.5. Some of them just get to the point where I just won't take a chance on somebody else shooting them or something else happening to them, that I'll go ahead and shoot them at 5.5. And the buck I shot this year is a prime example. That Zacchaeus buck was 5.5. That was kind of a management thing too, because I had some bucks younger than him that I think have more potential down the road than what he had. So there's a lot of factors that come into play in regards to the bucks that I'm going to shoot. But I call a buck 5.5. He's mature.
I gotcha. And I'm sure it's easier to, watch a deer from year to year to year and obviously have that track record with them and everything. But for, let's say, a new deer showing up, what characteristics are you looking at to age that deer if you're looking at cameras or even looking at them on the hoof if you don't have the history to go off of?
I don't think you can age a deer. In fact, I got a video on my YouTube channel about aging bucks without a history. I mean, I think you can tell a 1.5-year-old buck, and I think you can most of the time, the vast majority of the time, you can tell a 2.5. But once they get 3.5 and older, I don't think that there's anybody on the planet with any degree of accuracy can say sometimes, yeah, that's a 3-year-old, or it's just a guess from that point forward. If you hear me ever mention the exact age of a buck, it's because I've watched him from the time he was a 1.5 or 2.5.
Makes sense. Well, I very much appreciate your time, Mr. Higgins. Thank you for coming on our show. Really enjoyed it. I'm sure we could probably sit here and pick your brain for hours on whitetail. This would be the longest podcast ever if we had no time constraints, but appreciate your time.
Well, thanks for having me on. Be glad to come back anytime, and wish you guys nothing but the best.
Well, we'll certainly take you up on that invite and talk some more whitetail with you and at another time on our show. So thank you.
Awesome. Look forward to it.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Don.
You're welcome.
Appreciate you guys tuning in. Thanks for joining us for another Fall Obsession podcast. We'll be back with you guys again next week. Catch you then.